Cost of living crisis has claimed a major scalp. Woolworths CEO Brad Banducci following a disastrous media appearance this week.
Shouldn't have said that, Angus. Are we going to leave it in there if we are?
Well, I mean, we're on the record. You said it. I mean, you know, let's move on. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm done, guys.
You're walking out, really?
No. Can we just talk to Brad for a second?
Whilst an undeniable PR train wreck, it's not a fix for eye-watering grocery prices. So who is to blame for your hip pocket pain? Supermarkets are clearly in the firing line. The ACCC and a Senate inquiry will examine prices and competition and no doubt increase pressure on Coles and Woolies to pass on lower costs from suppliers and not increase their profit margins. But some economists claim supermarkets are simply undeserving scapegoats in the inflation blame game. Our next question for the jury: are supermarkets ripping off customers and suppliers? Representing the no case, we have Warren Hogan, Chief Economic Advisor at Judo Bank, and Dr. Mark Humphrey-Jenner, Associate Professor of Finance at UNSW Business School. He's prosecuting the yes argument. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us on what's been a very topical issue, you'd say, for the last few weeks. Mark, we already know that Australia's supermarket industry, it is dominated by Coles and Woolworths, who account for about 2/3 of grocery spending. That is a lot. Are they ripping us off?
Well, absolutely, they account for 2/3 of all what consumers are spending. Aldi and IGA only a tiny bit. Now, the real issue here is that Coles and Woolworths are really ripping off suppliers. Not necessarily customers as much, but definitely suppliers, and they're getting a raw end of the deal.
Why is that?
Why is that? Well, it's because the profit margins on many of these supermarkets simply aren't that large. So say, for example, we're looking at the net profit margin. It's only about 2.6% for Coles, 2.7% for Woolworths. So not making a massive profit per se. But what that means is that when their costs are going up, well, they need to find a way to survive. And the way they survive is by ripping off their suppliers, ripping off the cherry farmers or the dairy farmers or all of the suppliers that are facing increasing pressure to lower their costs or to not take a price hike so that Coles and Woolworths can maintain their profit margin.
OK, I understand your point. So, Warren, then in this cost of living crisis that we are in, is it fair to then point the finger at supermarkets?
Well, look, I don't think there's any evidence to say they're ripping off their customers.
Okay.
To the point, the only way you could argue that there's a systematic price gouging going on of customers is to see supernormal profits, and it just simply does not exist in the supermarket chains. They are really just returning something similar to other similar companies in Australia and retailers overseas. So you get no evidence of systematic price gouging, but to the point already made, it is less clear on suppliers. Now, we know that prior to the pandemic, the way that Coles and Woolworths really made sure their customers got the lowest price possible was putting pressure on their suppliers, for good or for bad. Now, of course, there's the issue of the farmers through to the big food manufacturers. Less evidence of that in the last few years, although it can't be ruled out, but certainly no gouging systematically of customers in the last few years.
OK, Mark, what do you think then of Anthony Albanese coming out quite strongly and saying that, yes, it actually is the supermarket's fault and he's the one that's called these inquiries? Is he right?
Well, Anthony Albanese is right to look at supermarkets, but he's looking at the wrong thing. He should be looking at their conduct with respect of suppliers, not so much the consumers as much.
Right.
So absolutely there is a question to answer here. Now, the problem with Anthony Albanese's inquiry is to some extent it looks like he's deflecting blame. It looks like he is trying to perhaps shift the blame for inflation to someone else. And to be clear here, well, there were dairy price wars. Between 2011 and 2019, supermarkets kept the price of dairy at $1. That was myopic because a lot of dairy farmers went out of business. We saw about 2,300 dairy farms close.
Wow.
They were squeezing their suppliers. And as a result, you end up with a situation now where the wholesale milk prices had to increase, thereby forcing milk prices to go up, which means that due to that myopic short-termism, well, effectively now they're kind of ripping off customers indirectly because prices have to go up because of their conduct with suppliers.
OK, let's go to the jury. Cassandra, do you feel like the big two, Woolies and Coles, are ripping off not only suppliers but also customers?
I think there's a valid argument to call out competition. I think we need more competition, supermarket competition in the market. But I also think what's fueling inflation is high energy costs, high fuel costs, and also high employment costs. And this is why Albanese and Labor are trying to deflect from that. So it's also classic. It goes back to class warfare and Labor governments trying to blame companies for their own failings.
Alan, do you think that supermarkets are being caught up in this blame game, or you think it's fair?
No, I think they have been ripping people off. They should. They're almost like a cartel. They don't have enough competition. I think there should be a lot of competitors in the market, and that's where we stand to win.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Warren? Do you think that supermarkets are actually getting caught up in this blame game when it comes to inflation?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that we have got the most concentrated supermarket industry in the world. So as you said, 2/3 for Coles and Woolies.
Yeah.
In the UK, that's 1/3 for the top two. In the US, 30%. Then you go to the top four, which includes IGA, Metcash and Aldi. We're at 80%, whereas in the UK it's at 60, the US it's 40. So there's no doubt there's concentration there. But I would argue it's been pretty well managed. I mean, this is a tough thing in a geographically large country with big logistics and supply chains all throughout the country. I think no one would argue that they haven't improved the quality of their product over the last, say, 20 years.
Sure.
So, look, I think they need to make a return on capital. There's no evidence of excess profits. And so I think it's very dangerous to sort of think that you've got to regulate them. Could there be more competition? Of course. But is it going to change the numbers? Is it going to change the result? I'm not sure it would. And I'm not sure that I think you would have risks with that if you forced competition by, for example, breaking up Coles and Woolworths across state borders or something.
But is reform needed?
I don't think it is. I think apart from on the supply side, I do agree with Mark on that front. It's the supply side that the focus needs to be.
Final from you. So reform?
There could be reform about the supply side. In particular, needs to be reform about how those supermarkets treat their suppliers.
Yeah.
How they're providing fees or providing funding or providing the capital, rather, the costs, upfront and quickly enough to the suppliers. About how they're negotiating and passing on the price hikes to suppliers.
All right, well, look, you've both had your say. It's time to call on the jury. Jurors, you have 10 seconds to deliberate the following question. Are supermarkets ripping off customers and suppliers? Time is up. What is the jury's verdict? Okay, we've got 5 no's and the rest of you say yes, that supermarkets are indeed ripping off customers and suppliers. Andrew, you said no. Why don't you think that's the case?
You look at companies like Woolworths and Coles, they're huge employers, over 10,000 staff each. You've got people in warehouses, you've got people in the stores that pack shelves, all these things. They have to account for costs at some stage, so there's always going to be a squeeze on everything. At the end of the day, yes, we may pay more, but everything is in the one spot for us. So that's what probably lucky. So we pay for that little bit of convenience. You can shop around and maybe save a little bit by going to different places, but make that trade-off yourself. That's something you've got to decide.
That's an interesting point. We're paying for convenience. Do you agree, Mark?
Well, certainly, say we're looking at a local location. We'll often have Coles and Woolworths in a very similar vicinity. Similar with Aldi, particularly in inner-city locations. So people often are going to the one that is more convenient to them, the one that is closer to them. So absolutely, people do pay for convenience, but in some locations, particularly regional areas, it's not so easy.
Yep.
I.e. Coles and Woolworths might be quite distant.
Yeah, that's a fair call. And Santhira, what do you think? Do you think that we're being ripped off?
I think so. They're charging more. Consumers.
Yeah. Well, look, it's an interesting debate and one that we find ourselves in this cost of living crisis. Warren Hogan and Mark Humphrey-Jenner, great to speak with you both on this. Thank you so much for joining us.